guys, this is Rachel with Cypress Textiles, and today we're going to work on part 2 of the Quarter Mandala Square from the Gloria Blanket. Okay, so where we left off yesterday, we pulled through contrast color number 2 in the last step of the final stitch of this previous row. And of course, like I said before, if you're using the Whirl or if you're using the Metropolis 10 gram color pack, you would just be continuing on with this color. So refer to the written pattern for the color changing notes. All right, so where we have is our contrasting color number 2 and the main color. So we still haven't wrapped the main color over yet. So we're gonna go ahead and wrap that main color over so that we can carry it up. And then we're ready to turn our work and start with the next row. Okay, so this next row, we're going to go straight into the first stitch with the beginning DC. So just go straight in with single crochet, chain 1. Okay, and after you make that beginning DC, you just need to chain 1 and then double crochet in that very first stitch, the same one as the beginning DC. All right, so in that first stitch, you're gonna have beginning DC, chain 1, DC. Okay, now we're gonna work into the center double crochet of these 3DC groups right here. So you've got all these 3DC groups. We're going to work into the center one all the way across. So you've got to skip 1 here. And then in the next stitch, we're going to work a 3DC cluster. So yarn over, insert your hook in that middle DC there, pull up a loop, draw the yarn through 2 loops on the hook. Repeat that, yarn over, insert your hook, draw up a loop, pull the yarn through 2 loops on the hook, and once more. And now you have a partial 3DC cluster here. Once you draw the yarn through all 4 loops, you've got your 3DC cluster made. Okay, then just chain 2 and make another 3DC cluster in that same stitch. So we're just going to yarn over, insert the hook and draw up a loop, and just do the same steps for your next 3DC cluster in the same stitch. If I can. All right, and draw the yarn through all 4 loops again. So now you have 3DC cluster, chain 2, 3DC cluster, all in that stitch. Now skip 2, and you're gonna make DC, chain 2, DC in the next stitch. Okay, so skip 2, and DC, chain 2, DC. Okay, there you go. And then in the next, after you skip 2 in the next center DC, you're going to repeat again your 3DC cluster, chain 2, 3DC cluster. And that is going to be how you work all the way across this row, just making 3DC cluster, chain 2, 3DC cluster. And then in the next center DC, DC, chain 2, DC. And I'll make those and step back, and then I'll just go ahead and hit pause and keep going. Okay, skip 2, DC, chain 2, DC. All right, so let's look at it. Okay, so here's how we have what we have so far, and we're just going to keep repeating this, alternating this little grouping of stitches and this one, and make sure you skip 2 and work into the center DC of each of these 3DC groups across. All right, so this is how that row looks when it's complete. You can see the alternating stitches here, and in the very final stitch, you're gonna work DC, chain 1, DC in that last stitch there. All right, so all the way across, I'll show you how it looks so you can compare yours and make sure it's right. You can always check the written pattern for the stitch counts as well. Okay, so now we're gonna turn, no color change for the next 3 rows now. So in the first DC, go ahead and make a beginning DC. So just do your single crochet, chain 1. And then you're gonna make a chain 1 that's for a chain space. And now into this first chain space, make a 3DC cluster. So yarn over, insert your hook into the chain space, pull up a loop, draw the yarn through 2 loops, and repeat that twice. This is the same 3DC cluster that we've done on the previous row. right, and draw the yarn through all 4 loops to complete the 3DC cluster. And now we're going to make the opposite stitch into the next chain space. So you're looking at DC, chain 2, DC into this chain space. That way you're alternating. Okay, so DC, chain 2, DC, all into that next chain space. All right, now in this next chain space, you're gonna work 3DC cluster, chain 2, 3DC cluster. Okay, so I'll make those, and I've said how to make them now, so I'll just go ahead and make it real time. Chain 2, and make another one in the same chain space. All right, and now we've got that so far. So now in the next chain space, DC, chain 2, DC. All right, so there we go. And now you're just going to alternate again, except for just flipping it. So your 3DC cluster, chain 2, 3DC cluster will go in this chain space. Then the next one, DC, chain 2, DC, all the way across. Okay, so this row is near finished. You can see how I've alternated the stitches here, and I'm ready to work into my very final chain space. So I'm gonna work into the last chain space with a 3DC cluster. Here we go. Okay, 3DC cluster, and then chain 1, and then DC in this final stitch right here. And you might have to scoot the 3DC cluster over a little just to be able to reach that chain space of your beginning DC. So there we go, got into the chain space and making a double crochet right in there. All right, so now that row is complete. I'm gonna go ahead and turn, and then beginning DC in the first stitch, and then chain 1 and double crochet in that very same stitch that you just worked your beginning DC into. Okay, so now we're ready to work into this chain space, and we're going to do just like this first row, except we're going to make chain 3 in between the 2 3DC clusters. So you're going to go straight into a 3DC cluster, into this chain space, and then instead of chaining 2, you're going to chain 3 now, just to open it up a little more since your square is getting wider here. So you're going to do chain 3, and then 3DC cluster again, and we're only going to chain 3 in between the 3DC clusters. So there we go, 3DC cluster, chain 3, 3DC cluster. Now working into this next chain space, you're going to do DC, chain 2, DC. So you're only widening in between the 3DC clusters. So I didn't want it to go too wide. So DC, chain 2, DC. And in the next chain space, 3DC cluster, chain 3, 3DC cluster. All right, 3DC cluster, chain 3, 3DC cluster. And you can see it in real time. All right, so here's how we're looking, and you can see how the 3 chains makes this look a little bit more open, and that's just to let it widen up a little bit more. So next chain space, DC, chain 2, DC. Okay, so we're going to keep on alternating those stitches, and don't forget to make 3 chains on your 3DC cluster parts until we get to the very end. All right, so now I'm at the end here, and I've alternated my stitches in the chain spaces, and I'm ready to make my very last stitch. So I'm just going to, in the final DC, I'm going to DC, chain 1, DC. DC, chain 1, DC. All right, so that's how my row looks when it's finished out, and I'm ready to turn. And we're going to work the 4th and final row of this section. Okay, so beginning DC in the first stitch. All right, chain 1 and 3DC cluster in this first chain 1 space. DC cluster. Okay, and just like the previous row, we're going to alternate these stitches, making 3 chains on the 3DC cluster, chain 3, 3DC cluster, and 2 chains for DC, chain 2, DC. So first, since I've worked this one on the previous row, I'm going to work DC, chain 2, DC. And then in my next chain space, 3DC cluster, chain 3, 3DC cluster. All right, and just alternate just like before, working DC, chain 2, DC in the next chain 3 space, and alternating until you're at the very end. Okay, so I'm just about finished with this 4th row of this section here, and I'm about to make my final stitch. And you can see I've got my alternating stitches here, and it's looking like it's alternating between this type of stitch and that type of stitch all the way up. All right, so in my very last chain space, I'm gonna work a 3DC cluster. And then chain 1, and then work a DC in this final DC here. Oh, and before we finish that last step of that final DC, we're gonna change back to the main color. All right, so no matter what pack you're using here, you're going to cut your yarn. So if you're using the Katana 10 gram pack, the Metropolis 10 gram, the Callista 15 gram, the Whirl, whichever yarn you're using, you're gonna cut the yarn there, because on the next row, you're not gonna be using that color anymore for the next color row. So cut CC2 or CC1 if you're still using CC1, and draw the main color through on this last step of the DC to finish it and change color. And really make sure that this float is nice and not loose, but that it just fits along the side nicely, because it is a long space to draw up a yarn, but we're gonna work over it later, so we're not worried about it. So just draw it up. You'd rather draw up this yarn than cut the yarn and have more ends to weave. So just bring it up and then let this fall to the front, pull over your CC2 that you dropped before, or CC1, whichever one you're working with, so that you can carry that up even though you're not going to work with it on the next row, all because we're just going to trap this there so it finishes that DC stitch nicely. So now we're going to turn, and we're going to work into the first stitch with the beginning DC. So go straight to a single and a chain 1. And now in this first chain space, we're going to make 3 double crochet. So go ahead and straight into this first chain 1 space, 3 double crochet. And so that's how we have what we have so far. And now we're going to work in between this 3DC cluster and this DC right here. So you're going to work into this space in the middle. There's no chain space there or anything, so we're just going to work into this little spot. You're not working into a stitch either. All right, so double crochet right in there. All right, now 3DC in this next chain space. If I can. Okay, double crochet in between this DC and this 3DC cluster. All right, so you can see the pattern here. We'll work another one so you can really see the pattern. In this next chain space, we're going to work 3 double crochet. And then double crochet in between the 3DC cluster and this DC right here. Okay, so now you can see a pattern start forming. So in your chain space in between, you're working 3DC, and then you're working in between this stitch here and this stitch here. So you're separating out these stitches that we worked in this row, in these 4 rows here. Okay, so 3DC in the next chain space. And then DC in between this stitch and this stitch, right in there. Okay, and I'll show you how that row is going to look on a completed square. So that is this row right here where you've got these double crochets in between each of these stitches. So you can kind of see how I've separated those stitches with that DC, even though there's not a chain space there or anything. All right, so go ahead and work in that manner all the way across until you get to the end. Okay, so the row is finished now, and at the very last bit of it, I've done 3 DC in the last chain space and then a DC in the very last stitch, just to mirror the beginning. All right, so here's how it looks so you can compare it to yours. Check out the pattern for the final stitch count, and we're gonna turn for this next row. So in the first stitch, we're gonna just make a single crochet and make a single in the next 3 stitches as well. So you've got 4 singles to start with. Now we're gonna make a back post double crochet. So yarn over, and around this next stitch right here, you're gonna make your back post double crochet. So with the yarn over on your hook, go up through the back to front, and then front to back. You're basically trapping this stitch and working around the post. And then if you tilt your work like this, you can see clearly when you're gonna make your yarn over and pull up your loop for your double crochet. And now just make a double crochet. And I'll show you how it looks. On this side, it looks like this, and you can see the bottom of the double crochet right here, the back post DC. And then if you turn it to this side, you can see it on the front right here, holding on to this stitch around the post. So it's a regular DC, it's just worked around the post of the stitch rather than going into the top of the stitch. And if you need more detail than that, just search up on YouTube, back post double crochet, and you can see more detail. So we're gonna go on to this next group of 3 DC stitches and make single crochet in each of them. So just single crochet 3 times, and then back post double crochet in this next stitch. And you'll notice we're working our back post DC into these stitches here that are worked in between. So go ahead and yarn over. Again, go back to front through this side of the stitch, and then front to back through the other side, so that whenever you make your double crochet, it's around the post. Okay, so now I've got that going. 3 single crochet, 1 in each of the next 3 DC stitches, just like that. And you'll also notice that the back post double crochet is the same height as our singles here. And that is intentional. So everything should be looking the same height right now. And from the front, you can see that the back post DCs dip down. All right, so we'll work our next back post DC. Okay, and then 3 single crochet. All right, so that's how our repeat is gonna be. Just make your back post DC and single crochet in each of these 3 stitches all the way across till you get to the end. All right, so my row is finished now, and I've got all of my final back post DC and my last 4 single crochet stitches. I've done 3 in these stitches here, and I have 1 more in my first DC from the previous round, so my last DC here. And you can see that mirrors this side, so we have 4 singles on this side and 4 singles on this side. Okay, so this is how my row looks, and I'll give you a sneak peek from the other side. So that's how our other side is looking. And we're actually gonna change color. So I'm just gonna back out of that final step of that single crochet, just so I can draw the new yarn through. So my new yarn, whether you're working, whatever pack you're working with, you're gonna have CC2 on this row. So it doesn't matter what pack you're using. You're gonna change to CC2 at this point. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, so you'll change to CC2. Just check the written pattern for the notes on when to change color. Sorry, I totally misspoke there. If you're working with this katana pack, or the Callista pack, or if you just like the look of this square and you want to do your color positioning just like this square, you're going to work CC1. You're changing to CC1. So we're going to go back to this bright red CC1 here. And if you're working Whirl or with a Metropolis 10 gram pack, you're going to change to CC2. All right, so all of this will have been CC1, and now you'll change to CC2. Check the written pattern, because now I've thoroughly confused everybody. So just check the written pattern for the color changes. In this particular demo square, we're going back to CC1. All right, so just draw CC1 through the stitch to complete it, and then bring your main color over so that you can carry it up as usual. And then you're going to work with your CC1 yarn. Okay, so here we go. We're going to turn. Okay, so in this first stitch, I'm just going to make single crochet. In each of these SC stitches across, single crochet. So you've got 4 singles to start out with, just like the previous row. Then we're going to chain, skip that stitch, and then make 3 single crochet. All right, so single crochet in each of the next 3 stitches. Chain 1, skip this stitch, 3 single crochet. Okay, so here is how your row looks so far. Okay, so my row is complete, and you can see at the end here I have 4 single crochet stitches, just because there are 4 SC at the end here. So that is a super simple row, and we're just ready to turn and work the next row. All right, so we're gonna make single crochet in the first 2 stitches. And now we're gonna do something special in the next stitch. So make a treble, yarn over twice, make a treble crochet in the next stitch. Okay, and you're just going to go straight into making a single in the same stitch, and then another treble in the same stitch. So you've got treble, single, treble, all in the same stitch. Then single crochet in the next stitch, and chain 1 and skip your chain. So we're going to go over this again for these next 3 single crochet. I'll tell you how to work into them. So this first single crochet, just make a single. The middle single crochet, treble, single, treble. Treble, single, treble. All right. So the next single crochet, make a single. Okay. So you've got single crochet, treble, single, treble, single crochet. Then chain 1, skip your chain, and keep going. That's your repeat. Okay, my row is nearly complete. So this is how we're looking from the back side. And then I haven't worked my final stitch yet. So I've got my last 3 crochet, single crochet here with my single, my treble, single, treble, and my single. And now I'm ready to work a single crochet into that last stitch and also change color. So I'm going to pull up for my single crochet, and then just my final pass, bring through my main color, and then bring over my CC2 so I can carry it up. All right, and now we're ready to turn and work with the main color. Okay, so for this next round, it's pretty simple. We're going to make single crochet in the first stitch and single crochet in the next stitch as well. And then we're only working into the singles. We're going to skip over these trebles here. So right in the middle, into that middle single crochet where you have treble, single, treble, you're going to work into the single with 2 single crochet. Okay, so work into that single crochet with 2. Okay, 2 singles. Now skip over this treble, and into this next single, just work a single crochet. All right, so we have, working over these stitches here, you have a single crochet in the first single of the row, and then a single crochet in the next one, 2 single crochet in that center single, and then a single crochet in the next single. Now you're going to make a front post treble crochet. So yarn over twice and capture the post of this back post DC that you have here, or this DC stitch that you have here. Capture that back post and working a front post treble crochet. So front post stitches are a lot easier than back post stitches just because you have a little more space in the front to work. So now into this next single crochet, work a single, skip the treble, work 2 singles in the next single, skip the treble, work 1 single in the next single crochet, and front post treble stitch. So yarn over twice, go front to back through the right hand side of this DC stitch right here, and come up back to front through the left hand side. Okay, and then make your front post treble. All right, and that's how your repeat is going to go across the row. So mostly singles with a front post treble thrown in here and there. And this is how we're looking so far. So we're kind of covering up the space in between these 2 treble bobbles there. All right, we're going to work all the way across till we get to the end. Alrighty, my row is finished. So you can see I have my single, 2 singles and single with my front post treble stitch there, and all the way across. When you get to the very end, you have your single, your 2 singles in the middle there, and your single, and then your very last stitch has a single crochet just so that it mirrors your other side when you have this extra single crochet in the beginning and in the end. All right, so now we're ready to turn. Check the written pattern for stitch counts just to make sure if you want to. And on this next round, we're going to start making slip stitches to level off and flatten this top part to go ahead and start making this a square.